of you and hope you continue to stay upright now. Stay out of that floor. As I've gotten older, I've noticed the floor is a lot further down than it used to be. You know, it just keeps getting further and further down there. I don't know what's up with that. Also, we have new House to House and Heart to Hearts. If you do not get those through the mail, then be sure and pick up a copy on your way out. That's the House to House, Heart to Heart. Pretty good little evangelistic tool you can use there to at least get folks in the idea of looking at their Bible. Boy, the wing has sure filled up over here. We got a big hole out over here. Y'all mind getting up, coming? But it's good to see everybody over there. We have been for the last several weeks looking at something called Christian apologetics, where we kind of just look at the defense of Christianity. And Elijah or somebody, Sawyer, would you be kind enough to cut off those lights right here, because this is kind of a visual thing today. And we want to use a scripture from Psalms 139, verse 14. And I just want to go ahead and say I apologize for the amount of material that's in this lesson this morning, but I wanted to get on to the inspiration of the Bible, which I believe to be one of the great proofs of the Christian faith. And in order to do that, I wanted to get through the human body today. But there's so much to talk about with the human body, and I'm just, to be honest with you, not qualified as much as I would like to be. One of the handicaps that theologians or preachers have when it comes to endeavors where biology is used is that we don't know the lingo and all that as much as a lot of folks do. And so I just have to tell you, if it wasn't for good brethren out there who have done a lot of research in this area, and I myself have done a lot of research in just a particular aspect of the respiratory system. But man, when you start looking at all the things that make up the human body, and what I want you to, if you don't get anything out of this lesson this morning other than this, there is no way, it is impossible for you to have evolved into the being that you are right now. The systems that we're going to talk about this morning had to be online. They had to all be there at one time when this whole engine started kicking off, if you will. It could not have been just a blob that decided, a muscular tissue that said, it'd be a great idea if we had a skeleton, and so on and so forth. Through all the various things that we're going to see, it all had to be there at one time. It would be like, as we spoke of last week, getting 8 pistons and just throwing them on the ground, throwing some gas on them and lighting it, and waiting for it to turn into a combustible engine. That's just not going to happen. There's a lot of things that have to be there, and it has to be in working order for it even to take place. Of course, we use the Psalm 139, verse 14, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. One of the great proofs that there's a design, the designer is the design, and we're going to look at the human body today. The miracle of life. There's no scientific information that explains the presence of life on earth in a naturalistic way. Evolution is a joke. Even the evolutionists say, listen, this is, there's a whole lot of things that we don't know. Origins, there's just no way this could have started but the best theory they can come up with is this cosmic explosion. And they say, that's the reason. Well, folks, where did the materials come from to cause the explosion? I mean, at one time Anthony Flew had said that he thought maybe space people, some intelligent life from some other place came and kind of planted the earth, if you will. Well, that makes a lot of sense. All that does is put you one thing back. Okay, where did the spacemen come from? Who created them? What was their origins? What's their beginning? You just keep doing that. Reminds me of one time Wesley Simons was talking with a fella on a door-to-door study. And the guy told him he was talking about creation and the earth, and the man says, you realize that the earth is sitting on the back of a turtle. And he said, well, okay, the earth's sitting on the back of a turtle. What's that turtle on? And he said, it's on another turtle. And he says, well, what is that turtle on? He said, another turtle. And Wesley says, well, what is that turtle on? He says, don't be silly, Wesley. There's just more turtles. And so, some people want to believe just about anything. But the law of biogenesis, you have these laws, they're proven. They're things that they tested over and over, and can't make it work any other way. A law of biogenesis argues that life derives only from pre-existing life. You can't throw it just doesn't spontaneously combust. It doesn't spontaneously generate. And so there's no proof for that. And that's what you have to have if evolution is true. And so we talked last week, this teleological argument. That just simply means an argument from design. Remember we talked about Paley and his argument from the watch, and how, you had one of the great atheists said that, well, what you have is a blind watchmaker, if that's the case. Well, it's ridiculous. We understand, we see something, we realize it was, as the Hebrew writer would say, every house is built by some man. All of this came from somewhere. There had to be some designer. And so design, of course, requires a designer. A painting shows design, but it's not alive. It's not moving. It's not breathing. And so we need to talk about factors that distinguish organic, or things that are alive, from things that are inorganic or not living. It is generally agreed by scientists that an object may be qualified or defined as living when, number one, it is capable of metabolism. In other words, it takes things outside of itself and breaks them down and produces energy with it, like us eating. That would be an idea. Number two, it experiences true growth, i.e. the multiplication of cells. A cell can break itself in half and become two cells, or things of this nature. I watched a video a couple days ago on DNA, trying to get my rope around, if you will, the idea of RNA and mRNA and how that all works. And, well, I'd just like to say I'm pretty much as confused as I was before, but I can tell you this, it's really, really complicated. And so for all that to just be, that was Anthony Flu's thing, when DNA, the idea of the multi-complex cell, that it's not just some kind of one cell, enigma kind of thing that just is like a blob, but that it's intricate and there's all this stuff going on inside of that one cell that people say, well, that couldn't have just climbed out of some kind of soup somewhere. It had to have some kind of beginning. So the idea of the multiplication of cells, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Number three, it is able to reproduce itself in an independent organism that replicates the original type. In other words, for us, having children, and children are based off of what we are. You don't see people having children and little dogs are born to them, or tomatoes, or cactus, or whatever else people today would like to say is in the woman's womb prior to its first breath. Number four, it exhibits responsiveness. In other words, it reacts to eternal stimuli. In other words, it's alive. It don't want to be bothered. You start poking at it, things of this nature, it's going to, react. It is capable of autonomous movement. In other words, it can move around on its own. It can locomote itself. And so there's no existence, there's no proof out in the natural, if you will, naturalistic way that that life could have began. There's no naturalistic explanation, no scientific proof. And so let's break down Psalms 139:14. David writes, or the psalmist writes, I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. I think most people, and maybe this is just the way I've been brought up. I know people would say, Ron, that's just the way you think because of where you grew up and things of that nature. I'd like to think that I'm somewhat normal, and I just can't believe of just sitting and just thinking about myself and just like I'm an accident. And I'm not talking about what my parents did. I'm talking about humanity. I just can't, that all of this, everything that we see, it just happened. And that the love that I have for my wife and the love that I have for my children, that I would lay down my life in defense of them, that I care, they mean so much to me, that I'd be willing to give up this existence to prolong their existence. And these relationships that we have, this bond that we have with people, other people, and just say somehow we just kind of all, that just happened by accident. It's nothing. My relationship to my wife is no different than a cockroach, to a rat with some cheese. That is just, we're nothing but stimuli. We're nothing but dirt that responds in a particular way to something else. That just does not make sense to me at all. I have never for one moment believed in something so ridiculous as the idea of consciousness and morality and things of this nature coming from being born in man, because we seem to react so much differently than when God's not in the picture. So evil, so willing to take advantage of each other and so forth. And what has been the real change in the world in the last 2,000 years? This is the Christ. It's the church. It's Christianity that's give the world a sense of rightness. Notice this word fearfully. Comes from the Hebrew word yareh, to cause astonishment, awe, to be held in awe. You are beautifully and wonderfully, fearfully. There's something about you, the way that you can send impulses from this tissue in your skull that will make your hands work, and the fact that your hands will do what you tell them to do. You can caress a baby. You can hammer a railroad tie in the ground with a sledgehammer. You're capable of such minute little operations as to be inside a human body and perform surgery, and at the same time being able to manufacture things like huge airplanes, things of this nature. You're fearfully. You're to be held in awe, the things, the human body. And wonderfully made comes from the word pala, to become distinguished, admirable. It's something to behold. And that's what the psalmist says. It's an awe-striking thing, the way that we're made, and it's to be admired. The same word is used next when he says, marvelous, or to be held in awe is thy works. When we think about what the God of heaven has done, my soul knoweth right well. I can't help but think so much of the time when people are arguing against God or against a particular thing, it's because of their conscience, that they can't bear the idea of one day having to stand before a righteous God and trying to give an account of the things they've done in this body, whether it be good or bad. And we all know that's exactly what God says is going to happen. Verse 15 says, my substance was not hid from thee when I was made in secret and curiously wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. This lowest parts of the earth is an idiom. An idiom is just a way you use words, a way you use language. For instance, man, I like that truck so much I'd give my right arm. Well, that's an idiom. You wouldn't really give your right arm. Well, it'd have to be a really nice truck. But, most of the time, that's just it's a figure of speech is what we might say. And that's what this is, talking about in the womb. And racham is needlework, to weave, embroider. There's something that takes place inside of the lady. There is something that takes place in there that's just absolutely incredible, how you can take the seed of man and the seed of woman, and they come together and they form a life, a child. And it's a little bitty us. We have like 206 human bones, As a little bitty baby, you have over 500, and they expand and stuff until you get big enough and they grow together. And so we get to the number of bones that we have, but that's a human being. It's an us. And we all started the same way. There's nobody in this room that didn't start that exact same way. And we're beautifully and wonderfully made, and we realize how precious that is because we've seen people who've been born with birth defects and things of this nature. We realize that there's a mechanism there, and sometimes it can go wrong. It can go wrong because we live too close to a certain chemical, or we smoked crack or meth while we were pregnant. It's incredible how many children are being born into this world because their parents are drug addicts and are being born and they're scarred. They start off. It's just amazing. It's a very precise. It's a very precious thing, and oh, how wonderful it is when you have that child and you're counting fingers and you're counting toes and they're all there. That means so much to us, and we realize some folks don't have that. And so when we think about what takes place, how important it is, what takes place in the womb. Needlework, and check out this word, curiously wrought. And so this is the only time in the King James it's translated this. Most of the time it's dealing with putting together. Notice Exodus 26:36. This is talking about the tabernacle. And says, "And thou shalt make a hanging for the door of the tent." Remember, there was a door you had to slide to get into the tent, of blue and a purple and a scarlet and a fine twined linen wrought with needlework. In other words, it's going to be embroidered. It's going to be a very precious thing to look at. And that's how the child being developed in the womb is described. That same word we looked at. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 18, Paul says, "But now hath God set the members, every one of them, in the body, as it hath pleased him." Vines makes a point to point out that the word "set" here is in what's called the aorist tense. And all that means is something happened in the past, and it doesn't really talk about what's happening after that. It's important to realize that took place. God has set the members, every one of them. God designed the Bible, listen to me. God designed the body, and it's one time. We have the same body that Adam and Eve had. Yes, I know it's had some, things happen to it since then as far as it dies now. I don't believe that was if we'd have been having access to the tree, but bottom line is he had lungs, he had kidneys, things of that nature. And so God has set the members, every one of them. The organization of the body, for organizational purposes, the body may be considered at 4 levels. The smallest unit is the cell. A cell is a microscope. You couldn't see this thing with a microscope, and if you had a microscope, it'd be hard, unless today they've got these really super duper, that has just improved. They've improved, and now they have different types of microscopes that use things other than just vision and, amplification. It says cells come in different types, sizes, and shapes. Notice this is the parts of a normal cell. You can't see this, okay? It's too small. You would have to have some really, really good equipment. And then when you break it down, inside of all of that, notice you have the nucleus of that cell, and in there is where your DNA that talks to the RNA, which becomes the mRNA, which turns into the aminos, which makes the proteins, which sends out the things that make us us. And look at all the junk that's going on around them. You got the mitochondria that's outside that produces the energy for this one cell. You have the cell membrane that will let certain things in and protects it from other things. And that's why when you have men like, these atheists that were, so dependent on the idea of evolution and biogenesis, they were just like, this is it, man. This is, this one little cell. Well, when they saw this, they're like, when they see the breakdown of all that's going on in that one little cell, even the honest ones have said, that just couldn't have happened, like that, like climbing out of a pool somewhere. You think about the human cells. We have so many different kind of cells that make up our body. Red blood cells, white blood cells. You have smooth muscle cells, neurons, which shoot the impulses from your brain down your spinal column out to the various things that we have. You have this, what's called columnar epithelial cells, and basically that's just your glands. These cells will excrete things to, parts of your body. It's absolutely amazing. Number 2, a group of the same kind of cells, in other words, you got all those cells together, carry on the same activity, is called tissue. And liver tissue is different from heart tissue, and heart tissue is different from skin and things of that nature. There are several kinds of tissue: muscular, nerve, and the different tissues. Connective tissue, like your tendons, things of that nature. Cardiac muscles are different than smooth muscles or skeletal muscles. And so all of this is in your body, and it's different, and you can't take one and turn it into something else. A group of different tissues all working in unison is called an organ. And organs are things like the heart, the liver, and so forth. And then here's some internal organs: your brain, lymph nodes, lungs, spleen, bone marrow. We'll talk about that more later. Used to, a couple hundred years ago, everybody thought bones were kind of inert. Wasn't much happening in there. And now we know without bone marrow, you've got some real issues. All your calcium is stored there, your phosphorus. And who knew? I didn't even know we had phosphorus in it. When I was in artillery, you want to be real careful with them Willie P's, which were white phosphorus. We'd fire those things, and they explode up in the air, and it looks like the sun. I mean, it's just a huge light that gives off, and that's phosphorus burning. Phosphorus is highly reactive. It's in your body, and it's stored in your bones because you need it to do certain things. Absolutely amazing, the human body. Number 4, a group of organs. When you have a group orchestrating to carry on a specific bodily function, they're called a system. And when you think about the systems, there's bunches of them: skeletal, muscular, circulatory, digestive, urinary, nervous, reproductive, lymphatic, endocrine, respiratory. All of these are independent systems that have these things. I shouldn't say independent. These are different systems that have different functions, but some of them are extremely dependent upon one another. and we'll talk about that as we go. Remember, if you don't get anything else from this lesson, is that your muscular system could not move around without a skeletal system. Your circulatory system has to be there to get the energy out to the muscular system, the blood, digestive system. You have to have the energy. You have to eat. You've got to be able to get rid of waste from the urinary system. Your nervous system is what controls all these different systems that tell you to swallow and so forth. Reproductive system, none of us would be here without it. Your lymphatic system is where these little filters you have throughout all your body. The endocrine, your pancreas, things of this nature that excrete these different hormones that make you all go. And none of it will work without the respiratory system. And the fact that somebody wants us to believe that you had gills and then you just one day decided, you know what, man, I'd love to play tennis and the ball just doesn't carry well out here in the ocean, so I'm going to crawl up on the bank, is ridiculous. If you go from gills to lungs, and then I guess, the orcas and whales and things of that nature thought it wasn't as much fun on land as they thought it was, so they climb back in the ocean and have to come up for air every now and then. It's ridiculous, folks. That ain't how it happened. And that's not even talking about the integumentary system. Think about that. This system that you have that helps cool your body down, filters the sun. It's called skin. And part of that is your nails, your fingernails, your toenails, hair. They all have these things that they do. They have these functions that, and once again, we're back to the very parts of the cells. Remember we talked about that nucleus? We didn't know beans about this 100 years ago. But now, this idea of DNA, it's absolutely incredible. And here's a strand of it that's super duper magnified, and it is the genetic code. In it is what color your eyes are, how tall you're going to be, longevity, things of that nature. It's all in this code. And this thing reproduces itself, and it does this through a process of RNA and mRNA, which kind of gets together and sends the messages out to the aminos, or these little things that become aminos that build the protein. It's way beyond anything that I can get my rope around. And the thing about it is that anything that we're talking about this morning, you could dedicate your entire life to it. And you know what you'd be doing if you spent 25, 30 years of it? You'd be doing like doctors are doing today. And what are they doing? They're practicing. Because do they have it all? You'd ask a doctor if he knows everything there is to know about the body. He'll tell you straight up. My brother-in-law has been a gastroenterologist. In fact, he's retired now. Well-established practice, been doing it for years and years and years. And, talking to him, I'd tell him some symptoms I have. That's a great thing about having a doctor in the family, right? And he'd say, well, there's a lot we don't know about this. And I'm like, man, this is what you do. But he's honest. We don't know why this does this, We have no idea why this reacts like this, but it does. And so we're just taking the information that we have, and we're trying to treat it, with medicines, things of this nature. Here's a man that I know is very respected in his field, and yet he'll be the first to tell you. And he spent his whole life from your mouth to the other end, dealing with that, and so much that he tell you, we don't know. There's just some more. If you ever get a chance to watch a video about the DNA cycle, to how it replicates and so forth, it's worth it. It'll boggle your mind that something's going on like that all the time. So let's begin very quickly, and I do mean very quickly. Skeletal, without it, you couldn't move around. It's very, I think like 40% of your body weight is like in your skeleton, and it's very durable. It's very light. If you had something that was made of steel, sort of like what we have, even hollow and everything, it would weigh like 3 times more than we have. It's how our tissue is held together. Our organs are protected. Our brain is protected. The backbone keeps the spinal column from being hurt. Notice the levers that we have. That's part of our skeleton. Metabolism. This is something that we didn't know 100 years ago. It's a reservoir of minerals, calcium, phosphorus, red blood cells, platelets. They come from your bone marrow. Without it, you're in trouble. Leukemia patients, that's the problem. Their bone marrow ain't getting it done, so they need transplants to try to make that work again so they can build their own red blood cells. And I'm sure there's different forms of it, but I have a friend that's going through that right now. More than 600 muscles in the body. This is the muscular system. They're the engines of the body. Voluntary, involuntary. Try to quit blinking. There's one of your involuntaries. And breathing, how many of us think about breathing? And what happens when you go to sleep? Well, you keep breathing. How's that? Because you got these involuntary muscles. Some of them are voluntary. Some of them are both, like breathing. You know, you can hold your breath, but you can also breathe when you want to. And so some are both. They work by tightening and contracting. There are no push muscles, but they often work in pairs. You know, you got your triceps, push your arm away from you. You got your biceps, bring your forearm to you, and so forth. Each muscle has its own stored fuel supply. Connected to skeletal tissue, there has to be this correlation to do this, you know, to let go, to bring together, and it's done by your nervous system. How did the muscles figure out what the brain has to tell them what to do? You ever have that situation where your brain's telling, you know, you're getting those misfires? You ever have that? You ever have a twitch? How many of you like to have an eye twitch? Isn't that a real bummer? Imagine if all your muscles were doing that. That's a real problem. But that's not how it's supposed to work. You're just having something's wrong. You're firing off, and you know you get a little twitch in your arm or something of that nature. But that's two systems, and one is dependent upon the other. The muscle's just going to sit there until someone tells it to contract. Absolutely amazing. Their cooperative nature, of course, is planned. The digestive system, teeth, grind the food up. You realize how important your tongue is? It tastes the things that make you salivate. You realize you make about a quart of spit a day? And people used to say, well, that fella ain't worth a spit. Well, that's not a good example because spit's very important. Starts breaking down the food, has germ things in there that help kill germs. It also helps roll. Your tongue will roll the food mixed with the spit into like a little ball so that you can swallow it. Think about all that takes place when you swallow. You have your lungs. Well, you got to close them off because you don't want mashed potatoes going in there. You'll have a real problem. So it closes off the lungs. It don't go back up your nose. You have two holes that have to close, one that has to open and then force the food down with these muscles that are being told by the neurons, by your brain, when to do that. Absolutely amazing. You couldn't have a digestive system without a neuron, without muscles, and you couldn't have that without the brain telling it. So there's three systems out there. Had to be online right then to start, to go. And the idea that they were developed over millions of years. Store it, the stomach, your temporary storage for the food, mixed with all those different acids in there. You got hydrochloric acid in there. You could eat a razor blade and the stomach acid would dissolve it. Do you realize that? That's how strong hydrochloric acid is, yet it doesn't eat the lining of your stomach. One of the great wonders is the fact that the stomach doesn't digest itself. That's why ulcers are such a problem. Why doesn't that happen? Scientists don't really know, but their big thought is the idea of the mucus that's produced, that over a 3-day period you will actually reproduce an entire new liner to the stomach. And that's done from glands located in the walls of the stomach. The stomach churns food. You don't feel that. Sometimes you do. But it's moving the food around, the small intestines, more digestive juices, the nutrients are removed, and then they're distributed into the bloodstream where the blood, your heart's going, it's moving all that nutrients out to your body. There's another system. Your large intestine stores stuff, water supply, and also a lot of bacteria in your colon that you need to help digest food. And, you see all these commercials nowadays wanting you to eat yogurt, but the digestive system, the liver, is the largest internal organ, weighs about 3 pounds, has over 500 functions. Can you believe that? It detoxifies poison, stores vitamins, stabilizes the body's blood sugar level, builds enzymes. The pancreas, a real small thing, real close to the small intestines, has 2 different types of cells that it produces. One, notice, is to make enzymes that help digest proteins and carbs, things of this nature. The other one, insulin. Produces your insulin. So it's got 2 different things going on with this one particular beautifully and wonderfully made, folks. Circulatory system, strongest muscle you got in your heart, in your body is your heart. It's carries materials throughout the body, the blood. Not only is it carrying oxygen, it has to run by the lungs, and the lungs are doing this crazy thing where they're letting carbon monoxides in, taking letting carbon monoxides out, bringing oxygen in, then they're running it through, grabbing some nutrients on their ways out to every part of your body. Absolutely amazing. You got the blood vessels, your arteries taking the blood away from the heart, veins taking blood to the heart, and all the capillaries that are doing their things out. Millions of capillaries in your body. The system, notice from Avram in her book on the circulatory system, says is so sufficient that the entire process of circulation, during which every cell in the body is serviced, takes 20 seconds. Imagine, you can't even get your oil changed that fast, can you? But yet every cell in your body is serviced every 20 seconds. The nervous system's control center, brain, spinal cord, nerves, regulates the actions of all these organs. You don't even think about it. You don't even know what's going on. And your brain is taking care of all that. Not only that, it's going, oh, what was that? It's monitoring all your senses. From you hear, you smell, all that, the brain's doing that. You know, after thinking about stuff like this for a while, I don't mind forgetting where I put my keys every now and then. My brain had to keep that liver going. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot going on. You think about the sense organs. And brethren, we could spend weeks talking about any particular aspect of any of this stuff. We talk the eye and the way that it works, the ear. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. The respiratory system, air passage, think of your nose, your throat, windpipe, bronchial tubes, your lungs, skeletal muscles to breathe in, to breathe out. You don't even think about your skeletal muscles that do that. That's one of the reasons, that's how they killed you when they crucified you. They were smothering you to death because you had become to the point where you could not use your muscles to take in air or to breathe out air. The excretory system, where your pancreas and, your kidneys, take things that your body's done with, waste, and get rid of them through the bladder and so forth. You think of the endocrine system, and these are all just so complicated. And these are just glands that control how fast your heart beats. All of this online. If you don't get anything out of this, think of the space shuttle and all systems go. You know, when the Houston, you'd see those big rooms full of all these computers that were monitoring everything that's happening with that rocket before it takes off. It is nothing compared to what's going on in your body at any given moment. The control systems, the amount of wiring, the things that are taking place, absolutely amazing. Yet we look at that and go, wow, the wonders of man. No, folks, we ought to be looking at ourselves and going, wow, the wonders of God. And you know as well as I do, any person who has lost any of these things that we've talked about, you lose the ability to clean your own blood and you have to spend hours every week on dialysis. You realize how important that is. You lose your sight. You realize how much of a gift that is. Hearing, you learn how much of a gift that is. And yet so many of us take this for granted each and every day. All systems go. They had to be online. You had to have a heart to pump the blood out to these various areas so they could do the things they do, include eat, to get energy for the heart to beat, for the lungs, for the bones, everything had to be there at once when it started. And that's what the Bible says happened. God spoke into existence everything. It was a miracle, folks, and that's exactly what it is. It was a miracle. God spoke it into existence. Here we are. You can have big bangs. You can, take all the TNT you want, blow stuff up, and you're not going to produce anything but a mess. And yet all the great minds of the world today want to tell us, well, that's how we got here. Somebody or something just blew up, and all of this is as you see. Some of your creation scientists have said that's as ridiculous as a tornado running through a junkyard and producing a 747 totally operative. So look at all these different systems. They had to be online together. We look out, we see all the wonders that man has made, satellite communications, cell phones. My kids, one of them they were watching a Santa movie last night, and Santa was talking on a cell phone that had the cord. That's how old the movie was. It was back in the days when car phones still had cords, in the car, not going down the street. So don't think it was that bad. But things have changed so much. We see that and we think, wow, how interesting that is. We can see this vehicle on Mars and think, man, man can really create something. But then we see like this picture of Mount Majestic, I believe is the name of it, from the Hubble Space Scope, and we're like, wow, look what just blew up and hung out there, that it wasn't created. Such is ridiculous. The Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. The writer of Ecclesiastes, Solomon, would say, let us hear what all this is about, why you're here. God created you, and you've got a purpose. Your whole duty, the whole of man, is to fear God and to keep his commandments. And when we look at these things, we ought to be, as Paul says, without excuse. There is a God in heaven. He's developed all of this, made all of this for this choice that you and I have. Oh, but man, if that choice goes wrong. You ever had your computer crash? Oh, isn't that a terrible thing, especially if you're not backed up? That's a terrible thing. But it's nothing like your car not starting, or you being on a plane and all of a sudden it don't work anymore. That'd be a bad thing. But think about system failure. Because all these various systems we talked about in the body, if one of them fails, you've got problems. You've got major problems. Something has to be fixed or you will cease to exist in this life. That's just how that works. But when you think about God and everything that He's done, what a complete failure it would be for you, your life, if you didn't take into account this and understand the fact that God loves you, put you here, created you, put you here to see how you would live this life. Don't let your life be a system failure. Fear God. Keep His commandments. You're here this morning, never obeyed the gospel. That's what you're here for. That's why God has went to all the trouble that He's done to bring us into existence. We, of course, could not control the free will. We just, we wanted to do things we shouldn't do. And so as a result of that, sin entered into the world, and God took care of that too. He sent forth His only begotten Son, that you and I wouldn't have to pay for eternity that problem that we have, the sin problem. Christ paid that for us. But we've got to be willing to do what God says. We've got to be willing to take the free gift that God has given. We've got to understand that there is a God in heaven, that He sent His only begotten Son. Based on that fact that Jesus died on the cross for our sins, be willing to confess that He is the Christ. Repenting of our sins, changing the way we live our lives to live how God would have us to live. Be baptized for the remission of our sins, just like God has said. He'll add us to the church. It's our duty and responsibility to live faithfully. If we can help you in any way,